There are places in this world where the weight of the past presses so heavily on the present that even the air itself seems thick with the echoes of forgotten tragedies. The 7 locks of the devil's prison are such a place. Hidden deep beneath the earth, lost to all but the bravest of souls, it is a prison that defies understanding. A place where evil is not merely contained, but bound by ancient curses that no mortal hand could ever hope to break. The prison is not marked on any map, nor does it appear in any records, for it exists only in whispers, an old tale passed down through generations, the warning of a dark secret too terrible to be known. To find it is to invite madness, to awaken the darkness that has slept for centuries. The ground here is thick with the history of what lies beneath. For those few who have stumbled too close to the truth, the earth itself trembles with the weight of what has been locked away. The prison was built in an age long past, a time so ancient that even the stones themselves seem worn by the very breath of time. Its construction was no ordinary feat, for it was not made to hold men or beasts, but something far darker. The prison was carved into the very bones of the earth, a place where no light could ever touch, where the shadows themselves seemed to thicken with malice. The first of the 7 locks was forged in the fires of terror and despair, when the creature, the being that had been locked away for eternity, was first imprisoned. It was said to be a force so evil, so corrupt, that the mere sight of it would drive a person mad. The legends tell of a time when entire civilizations fell to their knees before it, and kingdoms crumbled under its weight. But none of that was enough to deter the builders of this prison. The people who came together to construct this place did so with a single purpose in mind: to seal away the terror, to bury it beneath the earth, where it could never again reach the surface. But even the most powerful of wards are not immune to the passage of time. Over the centuries, the truth of the prison's existence faded into myth, its memory slipping from the collective consciousness of humanity. Those who knew of it became legends themselves, their stories whispered in hushed tones around campfires, their names lost to history. And as time marched on, the prison grew more and more forgotten. But as with all things in this world, that which is forgotten can never truly be erased. Deep in the earth, the prison began to stir. There is a sound that lingers in the air, faint but undeniable, a kind of hum that seems to vibrate through the very ground. It is a sound that only the most sensitive of souls can hear, and to those who do, it is a warning that the locks are beginning to weaken. At first, it was nothing more than a distant murmur, barely perceptible to those who walked above. But over time, that murmur grew louder, more insistent, as though the prison itself was calling out, reaching for the surface, yearning to break free. And then, one day, the first of the 7 locks began to tremble. It was a subtle thing at first, a faint shift that went unnoticed by most. But to those who knew the legends, to those who had been raised on stories of the devil's prison, it was a sound that carried with it the weight of dread. The first lock, forged from the very essence of evil itself, had been disturbed. The stone that held it in place groaned. The ancient wards that had kept it in check for centuries strained under the pressure of time. It was a warning that the prison was no longer as secure as it had once been. The air grew thick with the scent of something long buried, something foul that had been hidden away beneath layers of earth and stone. It was a scent that seemed to claw at the senses, suffocating, intoxicating. It stirred memories of nightmares that had never been fully understood, of fears that had long been suppressed. Those who felt it were not entirely sure what it was they were sensing. But they knew one thing for certain. Something dark was waking, and it was not content to remain in the depths any longer. As the days passed, the tremors continued, growing more frequent, more violent. It was as though the very earth itself was alive with anticipation, as though the prison below was stretching, testing its bonds, preparing to break free. And with each tremor, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Whispers that spoke of the devil's prison and the horrors it contained, of the ancient evil that had been locked away, and the consequences of its release. There are many who would dismiss these tales as superstition, as the ramblings of those too quick to jump at shadows. But for those who have felt the tremors, for those who have seen the strange, unexplainable things that have begun to happen in the wake of these events, there is no doubt. The prison is real, the locks are weakening, and the devil, in whatever form it may take, is stirring beneath the earth. But why now? Why, after all these centuries, has the prison begun to awaken? It is a question that no one can answer, for the very nature of the prison is a mystery. Some say that it is the rise of new power, the shift in the balance of the world, that has disturbed the ancient seal. Others claim that the time for the prison's release has simply come. After all, nothing in this world, not even evil, can be bound forever. But whatever the reason, the fact remains. The first lock has trembled. And with it, a chain of events has been set into motion that will forever change the course of history. The prison has begun to stir, and the world above is unprepared for what is to come. As the first lock begins to weaken, the sound of distant bells tolling echoes in the air. A cold wind sweeps across the land, carrying with it a sense of dread, a sense that something ancient and malevolent is stirring in the depths. The darkness that has been locked away for so long is beginning to awaken. And with it comes a feeling that nothing will ever be the same again. But there is still time, perhaps, to stop it. If the right steps are taken, if the prison can be sealed once again before the locks fully give way. But who can do it? Who can confront the darkness that waits beneath the earth, locked away for so long? The first lock has trembled. The echoes of its movement are already being felt. And now the question becomes, what will happen when the next lock begins to stir? As the first whispers of the past fade into the present, the world above waits in uneasy anticipation. The prison is not done with them yet, and neither is the darkness within. The prison beneath the earth was never meant to be found. Its existence, even in the ancient times when it was built, was meant to be a secret, a dark, buried secret. Yet even secrets have their way of clawing free, like water seeping through cracks in the foundation of a long-forgotten house. And so it was that the first lock, the most ancient of them all, stirred from its eternal rest. The first lock of the devil's prison was not like the others. It was not simply a physical barrier, nor was it a chain of iron or steel forged by the hands of men. No, this lock was different. It was something far more complex, far more insidious. Its very nature was tied to the earth itself, bound by ancient magics and curses that predated all known history. It was a lock born of the very essence of evil, a barrier so powerful that even the gods themselves had trembled before it. The stories surrounding the first lock are as old as the prison itself. Some say it was forged in the fires of hell, while others claim it was crafted by a forgotten civilization, one so advanced and so knowledgeable in the arcane arts that they were able to trap a being of unimaginable power. The truth of its creation like much of the history surrounding the devil's prison, is lost to time, obscured by the mists of myth and legend. But what is known is this: the first lock was designed not just to keep something inside, but to keep it contained, bound forever, so that it could never again see the light of day. The prison was built with this lock as its foundation. Every stone, every chamber, every winding passage was created with the sole purpose of ensuring that the evil within would never escape. The first lock was said to be placed at the very heart of the prison, deep beneath the surface, where no mortal could ever reach it. It was designed to hold the creature that had been sealed away for eternity, a being so foul, so powerful, that even the most ancient of spells could not contain it alone. So, they built a prison around it, a prison of stone and magic, a prison that would hold the devil himself. For centuries, the first lock remained secure, its power undisturbed. The creature within the prison slept, its dark influence stilled by the ancient spells and curses that bound it. But time, as it always does, began to erode the bonds that held the lock in place. The magic faded, the earth shifted, and slowly, imperceptibly, the lock began to tremble. It started as a whisper, a faint, barely perceptible sound that no one could place. A sound that seemed to echo from the depths, as though something within the earth was stirring, testing its restraints. At first, no one noticed. People continued with their lives, unaware of the growing unease beneath their feet. The tremors were small, almost imperceptible. A slight shift in the ground, a faint vibration in the air, nothing that could be attributed to anything more than the natural rhythms of the earth. But then, the whispers began to grow louder. A tremor, small at first, grew in strength. The ground beneath the earth began to groan and crack, as though the very bones of the world were protesting against the weight of the ancient seal. It was as if the prison itself was alive, aware of the presence within and struggling to keep it contained. The first lock, once so secure, had begun to weaken. As the vibrations grew stronger, so too did the whispers. They were not mere sounds, not echoes of the earth shifting. These were voices, faint at first, but unmistakable once they began. Some said they were the voices of the damned, the lost souls who had been trapped within the prison for eternity. Others claimed they were the voices of those who had come before, those who had built the prison and sealed the devil within, now lost to time and memory. And yet, others still believed that these voices were something far darker. The whispers of the creature within, testing its bonds, reaching out, trying to communicate with the world above. No one knew for sure what these voices were. But one thing was certain. They carried with them a sense of foreboding, a feeling that something ancient and evil was beginning to stir. As the whispers grew louder, so too did the tremors. The earth began to shake, gently at first, and then with increasing force. It was as if the prison was preparing for something that had been waiting for centuries, something that could no longer remain hidden beneath the earth. The first lock was failing. No one knew exactly when it had begun, but the signs were unmistakable. The very ground seemed to ripple, as though it were alive, its surface shifting in ways that no one had ever seen before. The whispers grew more insistent, louder, as if calling out to someone, beckoning them closer. And as the tremors grew stronger, the people who lived above the prison began to feel it, a strange, unsettling feeling that something was not quite right, that the world was shifting beneath their feet. At first, they thought it was nothing more than the usual tremors of the earth, the kind that occurred every so often in the region. But as the days went by and the vibrations continued, they could no longer ignore the growing sense of unease. It was as if something ancient and powerful was waking, something that had been asleep for centuries, but was now stirring with an insatiable hunger. The first lock was beginning to fail. The prison beneath the earth was no longer secure. The evil that had been trapped there for so long was no longer content to remain buried. It was reaching out, clawing its way through the cracks in the lock, testing the walls of its prison, waiting for the moment when the seal would finally break. And then, one day, the earth itself seemed to groan in pain. The ground shook violently, the air crackled with static, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic, as though they were trying to escape. It was the first real sign that the prison was no longer secure, that the lock had weakened to the point where it could no longer hold the evil within. The first lock had failed, and the prison was beginning to break. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but all who felt the tremors knew one thing. The time of reckoning was drawing near. The prison had been sealed for centuries, but now the evil within was waking, testing its restraints, and soon there would be nothing left to hold it back. The first lock had trembled, and with it, a chain of events had been set into motion that would forever alter the course of history. The whispers grew louder still, and the tremors grew stronger. The first lock had failed, and there was no turning back. The devil was awakening, and the world above would never be the same again. The prison was no longer secure, and the first lock had been broken. But what would happen when the second lock trembled? When the first lock began to tremble, a whispering shadow passed over the land, a flicker of darkness that made even the bravest hearts pause. It was as though the earth itself exhaled a breath that no one had realized it was holding. The tremors that shook the ground were not just the movements of stone and ancient magic, but the stirring of something deeper, something intangible. The whispering shadows, those elusive remnants of a past too dark to fully comprehend, began to stir, and with them came a chill that touched the very soul. The prison beneath the earth was not merely a structure of stone and curses. It was a place haunted by its own creation. The ancient ones who built it had not only trapped the devil, as the legends told, but they had also bound themselves within the very walls of the prison. The shadowy figures that lingered in its deepest chambers were not just lost souls. They were the architects of the prison, the ones who had sacrificed everything to ensure that the creature within remained locked away for eternity. But time, as it always does, had a way of unraveling even the tightest of knots. The whispers of the shadows that had once been silent were now growing louder, reaching out from the deep, stretching across the land like tendrils of darkness. They were the lost, forgotten memories of those who had bound the devil beneath the earth. And as the first lock began to fail, so too did the barriers between the past and the present begin to crumble. No one had truly understood the cost of the prison, nor the price that had been paid to seal away such an ancient evil. The very existence of the prison was a testament to the lengths people had gone to trap something far beyond mortal comprehension. The ancient ones had thought their work was done. The devil was locked away, its influence sealed behind 7 locks, each one a safeguard against the unholy power that waited within. But in doing so, they had unknowingly created their own prison. The curse of the shadows had been woven into the very fabric of the prison. And as the first lock trembled, so too did the curse begin to stir. The shadows had not remained inanimate or still. They had waited silently as the centuries passed, watching and listening as the world above changed. The Ancient Ones, their names now lost to time, had created a bond with the prison that could never be severed. Their souls, bound to the stone walls and the locks they had forged, lingered in a state of perpetual unrest. They were the architects of the devil's prison, but they were also its first prisoners. Their fate was sealed when they created the prison. They had become as much a part of it as the stones and the wards that held it in place. And now, as the first lock failed, the shadows of the past began to stir, drawing closer to the surface with each passing moment. The whispers, faint at first, grew more distinct. They were not words, not in the traditional sense, but something far older. A language not meant for human ears, a sound that stirred something primal within those who heard it. It was a sound that echoed not through the air, but through the very ground, a low, rumbling hum that seemed to resonate deep within the chest, stirring ancient fears that had long been forgotten. The sound was not one of malice or anger, but of longing. It was as though the shadows, the souls trapped in the prison, were calling out for release, for the breaking of the bonds that held them. But what they did not understand, what they could not comprehend, was that the prison was not only a place for the devil, it was a tomb for them as well. Their cries for release would only bring more destruction, more suffering. But as the whispers grew louder, as the tremors grew stronger, there was no telling what would happen when the shadows finally emerged. It is said that the shadows were once human, that they had once walked the earth as mortals, their hands stained with the blood of those they had sacrificed to create the prison. They were the ones who had performed the dark rituals, who had bound the devil beneath the earth. They had believed, in their arrogance, that they were securing the future of humanity, that they were doing the world a service by locking away such an evil. But in their blind zeal, they had condemned themselves. Their souls, now fractured and lost, had become the shadows that haunted the prison. They were no longer human, but something far worse, beings of regret and sorrow, trapped in a state of endless yearning. For centuries, these shadows had remained silent, waiting. They had no form, no substance, no purpose other than to exist in the dark corners of the prison, watching as the world above moved on. But now, as the first lock began to tremble, they stirred. The air was thick with their presence, and the very earth seemed to pulse with the weight of their anticipation. The shadows, once content to remain in the depths, now moved closer to the surface, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. They were calling out for something, but what? No one could say. The earth trembled once again, the vibration stronger this time, as though something great was about to happen. Those who had felt the first tremor, those who had heard the whispers of the shadows, now knew that something was changing, something that could not be undone. The prison was stirring, and with it, the shadows that had long been forgotten were beginning to awaken. The ancient curse that bound them to the prison had not broken, but it had weakened. And as the shadows moved closer to the surface, the world above would never be the same again. The whispers grew louder still, and those who listened closely could hear them more clearly now. They were not just the voices of the lost souls trapped in the prison. They were the echoes of the past, the cries of those who had built the prison, the ones who had paid the ultimate price for their arrogance. And now, as the first lock failed, the prison was no longer just a place of containment. It had become a place of awakening. The shadows were no longer content to remain in the dark, and the devil, locked away for so long, was waiting. It was as if the earth itself had been waiting for this moment, for the breaking of the first lock. The tremors grew stronger, more violent, as though the very bones of the world were cracking. The whispers of the shadows filled the air, and with them came the scent of something old, something ancient, something evil. The prison was no longer just a place of stone and magic. It had become something more. It had become a living thing, alive with the memory of what had been locked away and the knowledge of what was about to be set free. The shadows were no longer whispers. They were something tangible, something that could be felt in the very air. The first lock had failed, and with it, the whispers of the past had become a presence that was growing stronger with each passing moment, as though the prison itself was waking, stretching its limbs after centuries of sleep. And as the shadows moved closer, as the whispers turned into something more, the world above braced itself for the darkness that was about to break free. What the shadows sought, what they called for, no one knew. But one thing was certain. Their awakening would bring with it the end of an age, the beginning of something far darker than anyone could comprehend. The devil was stirring, and with it, the shadows were awakening, their long, restless sleep finally coming to an end. The prison had begun to break, and there was no stopping it now. The prison beneath the earth had always been a place of silence and darkness, a place where the devil had been locked away and the echoes of the past had been forgotten. But as the first lock trembled and the shadows stirred, there was another force, another presence that began to awaken. It was the keeper, the guardian of the prison, the one who had sworn an oath to protect the locks and ensure that the evil within remained contained. But the keeper was not like the others who had been trapped within the prison. He was not a soul bound by the curse. He was a wraith, a being formed of shadows and regret, a creature born of the very prison he was tasked with guarding. For centuries, the keeper had remained in the deepest chamber of the prison, watching over the locks, his form a ghostly silhouette against the walls of stone. He had no name, no face, only the endless duty that bound him to the prison. His existence was a paradox. He was both part of the prison and apart from it, a figure who had never known the freedom of the world above, but who had never truly belonged in the dark depths where he dwelt. He was the keeper, but he was also its prisoner. The curse that had bound the devil had also bound him, and he was condemned to remain within the prison for all eternity, his soul intertwined with the stone and the magic that held the evil contained. The keeper was not a man of flesh and blood. He had never been human in the way that those who lived above the earth understood. He was a creation of the prison itself, formed from the very shadows that filled the chamber where the devil had been sealed. His essence was a reflection of the dark energy that flowed through the prison's walls, a being of sorrow and vigilance. He was the last line of defense against the evil that waited below, the one who had sworn to never allow the devil to escape. And yet, as the first lock began to tremble, as the whispers of the shadows grew louder, the keeper felt a stirring within himself, a sense of unease, of foreboding, as though something was about to change, something that he could not control. For centuries, the keeper had stood watch in silence, his only companion the endless darkness that surrounded him. But now, as the first lock weakened and the shadows began to stir, the keeper found himself questioning his purpose. He had always known that he was bound to the prison, that his existence was tied to the devil's containment. But now, as the tremors grew stronger and the whispers of the past grew louder, he began to wonder if his role was truly one of protection, or if he had merely become another prisoner, another soul trapped within the prison's walls. The keeper's mind, though never fully human, was still capable of thought, of reflection, of doubt. And in that doubt, he began to question the very foundation of his existence. Had he been guarding the prison all these years, or had he been guarding the devil? Was the evil that had been locked away truly something that needed to be kept from the world? Or was it something that the world had forgotten for a reason? The questions gnawed at the keeper's soul, pulling at him like the darkness that surrounded him. He had no answers. The keeper's role was simple. He was to protect the prison, to keep the devil and the shadows contained, to ensure that the evil within never saw the light of day again. But as the first lock began to fail and the prison stirred with the weight of something ancient, the keeper felt the burden of his task more acutely than ever before. The world above, the world he had never known, was unaware of the struggle below. The prison, hidden beneath the earth, was a place of darkness and silence, a place forgotten by time and humanity. But now, as the whispers grew louder, the keeper could feel the pull of the surface, the draw of the world he had never seen. There was a temptation, a call that tugged at the keeper's soul. It was a call for freedom, for release from the prison that had been his home for so long. The prison had been his existence for centuries. But now, as the first lock trembled and the evil within stirred, he felt the stirrings of something more, a sense of longing, a yearning for something beyond the stone walls. The prison, which had once seemed like his eternal home, now felt like a cage, a place where he was condemned to remain, locked away with the shadows and the devil. And though he had sworn to protect the prison, to keep the evil contained, he could not help but wonder if the time had come for him to break free, to leave behind his legacy as the keeper. The keeper's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, violent tremor that shook the very foundation of the prison. The first lock had failed, and the whispers of the shadows grew louder, more frantic. The earth seemed to groan beneath the weight of the prison, as if it were alive and struggling against the chains that bound it. The keeper's form flickered in the dim light of the prison's deepest chamber, his spectral body vibrating with the force of the tremor. The darkness around him seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the shadows that filled the chamber seemed to twist and writhe as though they were alive. The keeper's instincts kicked in, and he moved toward the heart of the prison, toward the first lock. The ancient magic that held the lock in place was weakening, and he could feel the power of the devil's prison unraveling with every passing moment. The tremors grew stronger, the whispers of the past louder, and the keeper could feel the presence of the devil growing closer. It was as if the prison itself was awakening, stretching its limbs after centuries of slumber. The evil that had been locked away for so long was stirring, and the keeper, bound to the prison, could feel the pull of the devil's power. In that moment, the keeper knew that his role had changed. He was no longer just the guardian of the prison. He was now a participant in the struggle that was unfolding below the earth. The first lock had failed, and the prison was beginning to break. The evil that had been contained for so long was reaching for freedom, and the keeper, bound by his oath and his legacy, was the only one who could stop it. But as the prison groaned beneath the weight of the devil's power, the keeper was torn. He had sworn to keep the prison intact, to protect the world above from the horrors below. But now, as the first lock trembled and the shadows whispered in his ears, he wondered, Could he still keep the prison intact? Could he still hold back the evil that was stirring? Or had the time come for the devil to break free? The keeper stood at the heart of the prison, the darkness around him thick with the whispers of the past. The prison was breaking, the evil within awakening, and the keeper's fate was tied to the prison itself. He could not stop the devil from escaping, but could he find a way to bind it once more? Or would the keeper, like the shadows and the souls trapped within the prison, become another lost memory, another whisper in the dark, forever bound to the prison he had sworn to protect? The question echoed through the prison's walls as the first lock trembled once again. The keeper, bound by his legacy, stood on the precipice of fate. And as the darkness grew closer, he wondered if he could ever escape the prison's grip, or if he too was destined to remain trapped within its walls forever. The world above had not yet felt the full tremor of the first lock's failure, nor the stirring of the ancient evil that had been sealed beneath the earth for so long. To them, the tremors had been mere whispers in the wind, insignificant and unnoticed. But below the surface, the prison had begun to crack. The first lock had failed, the whispers of the shadows had stirred, and the keeper, torn between his legacy and the world above, had felt the shift with a profound sense of foreboding. Yet it was not only the prison itself that had begun to stir, but the curse that had long been hidden away, the curse of knowledge that had been sealed with the second lock. The second lock was different from the first. It was not just a barrier of stone or magic. It was a prison of the mind. The second lock had not been placed to guard the devil, nor to keep the shadows at bay. No, the second lock had been placed to guard something far more dangerous: the knowledge of what lay within the prison. It was said that the prison itself was not merely a place of containment. It was a place of knowledge, a repository of forbidden truths, of ancient wisdom so powerful that even the gods themselves had feared it. This knowledge was not meant to be known by mortal minds, for to understand it would be to touch the very essence of darkness itself. The curse of knowledge, sealed by the second lock, was the very heart of the prison. It was not just the evil that had been locked away, but the understanding of its origins, the understanding of the forces that had created it, and the understanding of the consequences of its release. The second lock had been designed not to contain the devil, but to protect humanity from the terrible knowledge that lay buried beneath the earth. For those who sought the truth of the prison would be condemned, their minds shattered by the weight of understanding, for the truth was not meant to be known. And so, the second lock had remained in place, untouched and unchallenged for centuries. But as the first lock trembled and the prison began to stir, so too did the second lock begin to weaken. The whispers of the shadows grew louder, their presence more palpable, and the curse of knowledge began to stir with them. Those who were drawn to the prison, those who sought to uncover its secrets, were unknowingly drawn to the second lock. The devil, it seemed, was not the only thing that had been contained within the prison's walls. The very knowledge of the evil within had been buried, sealed away by those who had built the prison, to prevent anyone from understanding the true power of the creature they had trapped. But now, as the first lock trembled and the prison began to crack, the knowledge of the second lock began to seep into the world above, beckoning those who would seek it. The curse of knowledge was a silent thing. It did not manifest as a physical presence. It did not appear in the form of a creature or a shadow. No, the curse of knowledge was far subtler than that. It was a compulsion, a pull, a nagging desire to understand what should never be known. It crept into the minds of those who dared to approach the prison, planting seeds of doubt, of curiosity, of hunger for the forbidden. It whispered to them in their dreams, in their waking moments, urging them to seek out the truth, to unlock the secrets that had been hidden for so long. And those who succumbed to the call, those who dared to confront the second lock, would find themselves faced with a choice. To walk away, to leave the prison and its secrets buried, or to risk everything for the knowledge that lay beyond the lock. But there was no escape from the curse of knowledge. The truth, once known, could never be forgotten, and those who sought it would be changed forever. The whispers grew louder still, and the tremors of the prison seemed to shake the very ground beneath the feet of those above. The second lock, though still intact, could not remain secure forever. The devil, locked away for so long, was reaching for the surface, and with it came the knowledge that had been sealed away with him. The curse of knowledge was awakening, and the more the second lock weakened, the stronger the pull became. The keeper, too, felt the stirrings of the curse. He had always known that his role was to guard the prison, to protect the world above from the evil contained below. But now, as the whispers of the second lock filled the air, he found himself caught between his duty and the knowledge that was beginning to seep into his consciousness. He had never understood the true nature of the prison, never fully grasped the significance of the second lock. But now, as the prison began to stir and the whispers grew louder, he could feel the weight of the knowledge pressing against his mind, pushing at the edges of his thoughts. The truth was beckoning to him, just beyond reach, and he could no longer ignore it. The keeper had been created to protect the prison. But now, as the second lock weakened, he realized that he had been bound by more than just duty. He had been bound by the very curse that had sealed away the knowledge of the prison. The second lock was not just a physical barrier. It was a barrier to his own understanding. He had been kept in the dark for centuries, and now, as the prison stirred, he could feel the veil of ignorance beginning to lift. The knowledge was there, waiting for him to take it, to understand it. But at what cost? The keeper's mind raced as the whispers of the second lock filled the air, a cacophony of voices that tugged at his soul. The truth was within his grasp, but so too was the danger. The curse of knowledge was not something that could be controlled. Once the second lock was broken, the knowledge would be released, and nothing could contain it. The prison would no longer be a place of containment. It would become a place of revelation, and the truth that had been hidden away for so long would be known to all. The second lock trembled, its power weakening with each passing moment. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the prison began to shake beneath the earth. The curse of knowledge was awakening, and with it came the realization that the world above would never be the same again. The knowledge of the prison, of the devil, and of the forces that had created it was about to be unleashed. And once the second lock was broken, there would be no going back. The keeper, torn between his duty and the knowledge that called to him, stood at the heart of the prison, the second lock trembling before him. He could feel the power of the curse pressing against him, urging him to understand, to know the truth. But in that moment, he realized something far more important. The prison was not just a place of evil. It was a place of knowledge, of understanding. And that understanding would change everything. The second lock would soon break, and the world above would be forever altered by the truths that lay buried beneath the earth. The keeper's hand hovered, over the second lock, the whispers filling his mind. The truth was within his reach, and yet the consequences of knowing it weighed heavily on his soul. The second lock had failed, and soon the world above would know the curse of knowledge. Would the keeper let it out? Or would he remain true to his duty, to keep the knowledge locked away forever? The prison was awakening, and with it, the ancient evil and the terrible truth that had been hidden beneath the earth for so long. The second lock had trembled. Soon, it would break. The prison beneath the earth had always been a place of silence. But now, as the second lock began to break, the sound of its undoing echoed through the dark, cavernous halls. The tremors grew violent, more intense, as though the very foundations of the earth itself were groaning in protest. It was not just the first lock that had failed. The second lock, the key to all that lay hidden in the prison's depths, was now unraveling. And with it came the knowledge, the terrible, forbidden knowledge that had been buried for so long. The second lock had been designed to keep the truth sealed away, to protect the world above from the darkness that had been locked beneath. It had been a safeguard against the knowledge that could destroy minds, unravel sanity, and bring chaos to the world. But now, as the lock began to tremble, the world above was starting to feel the consequences. The whispers of the shadows grew louder, their voices rising like a chorus of forgotten souls. The very air seemed to vibrate with the pressure of what was to come, the weight of knowledge that had been buried, now clawing its way to the surface. The keeper, once a silent guardian bound to his duty, now found himself caught between the collapsing walls of the prison and the knowledge that sought to break free. He had spent centuries guarding the devil, but now he was faced with a far greater danger: the release of the truth that had been sealed away for eons. The knowledge, the understanding of what lay within the prison, was no longer something that could be ignored. It was a force, a tide of information that threatened to engulf everything in its path. The second lock was breaking, and with it, the curse of knowledge was awakening. The keeper's heart, though not human, beat with an urgency that mirrored the tremors beneath his feet. He had always known that his role was to protect the prison, to ensure that the devil remained locked away. But now, as the second lock began to tremble, he understood that his role had never been just to guard the prison. He had been bound to it, bound to the curse of knowledge just as much as the devil had been bound to the stone walls. The truth had always been there, just beyond his reach, a shadow that loomed over his every action, his every thought. Now, as the prison stirred with life, the truth was closer than ever. But the keeper was not the only one who felt the power of the second lock's undoing. Those who had been drawn to the prison, those who had sought its secrets, were now feeling the pull of the truth. The curse of knowledge was not something that could be contained by walls or barriers. It was a force that sought to break free, to spread across the world. And once it was unleashed, there would be no turning back. The prison had always been a place of darkness, but now it had become a place of revelation, a place where the deepest secrets of the earth would no longer remain hidden. The ground trembled once again, and the keeper felt the first true shift in the prison's foundations. The second lock was no longer a barrier. It was a breach, a rupture in the very fabric of the prison. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as though the voices of the past were trying to make themselves heard. And then, in the heart of the prison, there was a sound, a low, grinding noise, as though the stone walls themselves were being torn apart. The second lock had failed, and with it, the floodgates of knowledge burst open. The truth, the terrible, dark truth that had been sealed away for centuries, rushed forth in a torrent. It was a knowledge not meant for human minds, a truth so ancient and so powerful that it could unravel the very fabric of reality. It was the knowledge of the devil, of the dark forces that had created him, of the ancient civilizations that had sought to control him and failed. It was the knowledge of the very origins of evil, the dark seed that had been planted at the beginning of time, and the consequences of its existence. It was the knowledge of everything that had been hidden, buried beneath the earth, locked away for the protection of all. The keeper could feel the weight of it, the pressure building within him. The truth was pouring into his mind, flooding his thoughts with images, with visions of things that no living being should ever witness. He saw the origins of the prison, the dark rituals that had been performed to trap the devil, and the sacrifices that had been made to ensure that he remained locked away. He saw the shadows, the lost souls who had bound themselves to the prison, and the curse that had been placed upon them. He saw the rise and fall of empires, the bloodshed, the destruction, all in the name of keeping the devil contained. And he saw the moment when the second lock had been forged, the moment when the knowledge had been sealed away, a moment that had marked the beginning of the end. The keeper was drowning in the truth, overwhelmed by the knowledge that had been locked away for so long. The curse of knowledge was consuming him, and he knew that if he did not stop it, if he did not close the breach, the world above would be engulfed in the same darkness that had been sealed beneath the earth. The second lock had broken, and with it, the knowledge had been unleashed. There was no going back now, but the keeper, for all his torment, still had a choice. He could seal the breach, close the floodgates once again, and keep the knowledge buried. Or he could allow the truth to spread, to reach the world above, and watch as everything he had sworn to protect was torn apart by the revelation of what lay beneath the prison. The earth trembled, the air thick with the presence of the knowledge that had been released. The keeper's thoughts were a maelstrom, swirling with images and sounds, with the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were voices. They were faces. They were images of the past, all calling to him, all urging him to embrace the truth. And in that moment, the keeper understood the true nature of his curse. He was not just a guardian of the prison. He was the keeper of the knowledge, the one who had been bound to it for all eternity. The prison had always been a place of silence and darkness, but now it was a place of revelation, a place where the truth could no longer be hidden. The second lock had failed, and with it, the knowledge had been unleashed. The keeper stood at the heart of the prison, the darkness pressing in around him, the truth swirling in his mind. He could feel the weight of the decision he had to make. Could he stop the flood of knowledge, or had it already begun to spread beyond his control? The whispers grew louder still, their voices becoming clearer, more insistent. The second lock had broken, and the prison was no longer just a place of containment. It had become a place of revelation, and the knowledge that had been sealed away for so long was now free. The keeper's heart, though not human, beat with a sense of finality. The truth had been released, and there was no going back. The prison was awakening, and with it, the devil, the shadows, and the terrible knowledge that had been locked away for so long. The second lock had failed. The floodgates of knowledge were open, and the world above was about to feel the consequences. The keeper could only watch as the darkness spread, knowing that he was as bound to it as the prison itself. The second lock had broken, and with it, the world would never be the same again. The prison beneath the earth had always been a place of darkness and silence. But now, as the second lock shattered, and the knowledge of the devil was released into the world above, the silence was broken by the most chilling sound of all. The sound of something waking, something that had been dormant for centuries. The very air trembled with the anticipation of what was to come, as though the earth itself had held its breath for too long. And now it was exhaling with force, a wave of ancient power rushing to the surface. The first lock had been the physical barrier, the second, the prison of knowledge. But it was the third, the one that had never been spoken of, the one that had never been understood, that held the true power of the devil's prison. The second lock had held the truth of the devil's origin, the knowledge of his creation, the power to destroy minds and unravel the world. But now, as the second lock fell away, the power that had been contained beneath the earth was beginning to awaken. The devil himself, trapped for centuries, was stirring, his power reaching out across the prison like a pulse, a force too great to ignore. It was as if a switch had been flipped. A dormant beast that had long been chained in a deep, dark cave was now rousing from its slumber. His presence could be felt throughout the prison, and soon the tremors that had been confined to the deep would reach the surface. The air thickened with his presence, suffocating, dark and malignant. It was a presence that seemed to seep into every corner of the earth, infecting everything it touched. The walls of the prison, built to contain the devil's power, were beginning to crack, the seams of reality itself starting to tear. The keeper, now bound to the prison not just by duty but by the curse of knowledge, felt the pulse of the devil's power reverberating in his own being. His soul, once a wraith bound to the stones of the prison, was now tethered to the force that sought to break free. The devil was awakening, and with him, the shadows that had long been trapped within the prison's walls. The keeper felt a profound unease, a sense of inevitability that filled him with dread. The chains that had once held the devil had been loosened by the breaking of the second lock. It was only a matter of time before the devil himself would break free. The keeper had always known his role was to guard the prison, to protect the world above from the evil that lay beneath. But now, as the prison trembled and the whispers of the shadows grew louder, the keeper began to realize that he had never truly understood the power of the prison. The devil had been sealed away for a reason, and that reason was not merely to contain him. It was to protect humanity from the unrelenting force of pure evil that sought to consume everything in its path. The power that had been kept in check for so long was now beginning to seep out, and with it came the knowledge of what the devil could do when freed. The keeper had long held on to his duty, believing that his existence was tied to the protection of the prison. But now, as the devil began to awaken, he realized that his role was far greater, or perhaps far more cursed, than he had ever imagined. He was not merely a guardian. He was the one who held the key to the devil's freedom. His connection to the prison was not just one of duty, but one of fate. The devil had been locked away for centuries, but now that the second lock had failed, the chains of fate were beginning to unravel. The ground beneath the keeper's feet shook violently as the devil's power surged through the prison's chambers, breaking free of the restraints that had kept it bound for so long. The earth groaned in agony, the walls of the prison buckling under the weight of something ancient and terrible. The whispers of the shadows grew louder, their voices a cacophony of sorrow, regret, and fear. They had been trapped with the devil for centuries, bound by the same curse, and now they too began to stir, their restless longing for freedom growing as the devil's power spread throughout the prison. And then, from the deepest recesses of the prison, came a sound that froze the keeper's very soul. The sound of chains rattling, the sound of something stirring after eons of slumber. The devil was waking. The power that had been locked away for so long was beginning to take shape, to break free of its bonds. The air became thick with darkness, the shadows stretching out like tendrils, reaching for the world above. The prison was no longer a place of containment. It had become a place of birth, a birthplace for the evil that had been locked away for too long. The keeper could feel it in the very core of his being. The prison, once silent and still, was now alive with the devil's power. It was as though the walls themselves were breathing, pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat that grew louder with every passing moment. The devil was no longer just an entity trapped in the prison's depths. He was becoming something more. His presence was filling the space around the keeper, pressing against him, suffocating him with its weight. The whispers of the shadows intensified, and the keeper understood now that the prison had always been a living thing. Not just a tomb for the devil, but a vessel for his power, a prison that had contained not just his body, but his essence. The keeper, bound to the prison, could feel the devil's awakening with every fiber of his being. He was no longer just the guardian of the prison, he was part of it, a reflection of its power. The chains that had held the devil for so long were now breaking, and with each passing second, the devil's power grew stronger. The keeper felt a cold chill wash over him, a sense of dread that seeped deep into his soul. The prison had always been a place of silence, but now it was a place of noise, a place where the very fabric of reality was unraveling with each passing moment. The prison was waking up, and with it, the devil was awakening too. For centuries, the devil had been contained, his power suppressed by the first lock, the second lock, and the countless layers of magic and stone that had been built to keep him at bay. But now, the second lock had broken, the chains were snapping, and the devil was no longer a prisoner. He was a force, a presence that could no longer be denied. The keeper, trapped within the prison's walls, knew that his time was running out. The devil was awakening, and with him came the shadows, the evil that had been locked away for so long. The prison, once a place of containment, was now a place of release. The devil was free, and with his freedom came the chaos, the darkness, and the destruction that had been kept at bay for centuries. There was no turning back now. The prison was no longer a prison. It was a gateway, a rift between the earth and the infernal. And the devil was emerging from its depths. The world above would soon feel the consequences of what had been released below. And the keeper, bound to the prison and to the devil's awakening, could only watch as the darkness spread, knowing that he was as much a part of it as the prison itself. The devil had broken free, and with him, the world would never be the same again. The prison had always been a silent, suffocating place, a place where time itself seemed to stand still, where the world above had forgotten the horrors that lay below. But now, as the earth trembled and the final threads of the second lock gave way, the world was beginning to remember. The devil's awakening was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was a roar that could be felt in every corner of the earth. The prison, once a tomb for the dark forces trapped within, had become a doorway, a threshold between the realm of the living and the horrors of the past. The devil had not only broken free of his chains, He had emerged from the very fabric of the prison, and with him came the promise of darkness, of chaos, and of a reckoning that no one could escape. The keeper had watched in silence as the devil's power grew, as the prison that had been his home for centuries began to crack open. The very walls, once sturdy and unyielding, were now crumbling under the weight of what had been released. The keeper, bound by his duty, had never questioned his role. But now, as the devil's presence filled the prison, he felt the walls closing in. He had once believed that the prison was a place of safety, a place where the devil could never escape. But now, as the ground shook and the darkness spread, the keeper realized that the prison had never been a true place of safety. It had been a trap for both the devil and for those who had created it. The whispers, once faint and distant, were now deafening. They came from every corner of the prison, from every shadow and every crack in the stone. The voices of the damned, the souls that had been trapped within the prison for so long, were crying out, their tormented wails filling the air. They had been locked away with the devil, bound to the same curse that had held him in place for centuries. But now, as the devil's power surged, they too were awakening. The prison was no longer a place of containment. It had become a place of release. The devil was free, and with him came the broken souls, the lost and the damned, all of them yearning for something more. The keeper stood at the heart of the prison, his form flickering like a shadow against the dim, flickering light that barely penetrated the depths of the stone. The prison had been his entire existence, and yet, as the devil's power surged through the very walls around him, the keeper felt the last remnants of his duty slipping away. He had once been the one who held the key to the prison, the one who had sworn to keep the devil contained. But now, as the devil's return seemed imminent, he could no longer deny the truth. He had become as much a prisoner as the souls trapped within the prison. He was bound to the very force that had been unleashed, unable to break free. The devil's return was not simply the return of an ancient evil. It was the return of something far more primal, far more terrifying. It was the return of a force that had shaped the world before time, a force that had influenced everything from the rise and fall of civilizations to the very essence of human nature. The devil was not just a being of darkness. He was the embodiment of chaos, of destruction, of the desire to undo all that had been created. His return meant that the natural order of things would be torn apart, and nothing in the world above would remain untouched. The keeper could feel the devil's power swirling around him, growing stronger with each passing second. It was a power that seemed to reach into the deepest recesses of his being, stirring something long buried within him. The truth, the knowledge of what the devil truly was beginning to surface. And with it came the understanding that the devil's return was not a mere escape from the prison. It was a reckoning, a moment of ultimate judgment for the world above and the world below. The devil had been contained, yes, but he had never been fully defeated. And now, as the final threads of the second lock unraveled, the devil was ready to reclaim what had been lost. The ground shook violently beneath the keeper's feet, and for the first time, he could feel the presence of the devil in the very air around him. The darkness that had once been contained in the prison was now pouring into the world, filling every corner, every crevice. It was as though the devil was reclaiming his dominion, spreading his influence across the earth. The keeper's mind swirled with visions of what was to come, of the destruction that would follow in the wake of the devil's return. And in that moment, the keeper realized that the world would never be the same again. The whispers of the lost souls grew louder, their voices more urgent, more desperate. They had been trapped in the prison for so long, bound to the devil by the curse that had sealed him away. But now, as the devil's power surged, they too began to awaken, their tormented cries filling the air. The keeper could hear their pleas, their cries for release, their cries for freedom. But it was not the devil who had kept them bound. It was the very prison that had been designed to contain him. The prison had never been a place of safety. It had been a place of torture, a place of suffering. The souls trapped within it had never known peace, never known release. And now, as the devil's power filled the prison, the earth trembled as the prison below the surface began to crack. The devil had been freed, and with his liberation, the world had changed forever. What had once been a sealed tomb, a forgotten corner of the world, now pulsed with a dark vitality. The shadows had stretched beyond their confinement, and the air above the earth was thick with the presence of an ancient evil that had been locked away for centuries. The veil between worlds had been torn, and the waking of the devil was just the beginning. In the heart of the prison, the keeper stood motionless, feeling the devil's power resonate through the very core of his being. His connection to the prison had always been unquestioned, until now. His role as guardian, as protector of the earth, had always been clear. But now the rules had changed. The devil was awake. The very power that had been contained for so long was no longer confined by walls or magic. It was loose, and nothing could stop its march across the earth. The keeper's thoughts raced, but they were fragmented, disjointed, like the shattered pieces of a dream. His mind was no longer his own. The truth that had been kept hidden from him for centuries had flooded his consciousness, overwhelming him with knowledge too vast, too terrible to grasp. The second lock had been broken, and the devil's power was pouring forth in a torrent. The keeper was bound to the prison, to the very stone walls that had contained the evil, and yet he now felt the pull of something far greater, a force that sought to reclaim the world that had long forgotten its terror. The ground shook beneath the keeper's feet, a low, rumbling sound that reverberated through the stone chambers. Above, the world was beginning to stir as well. The first tremors had been subtle, almost unnoticed, but now they were growing stronger. The whispers, once faint and distant, had turned into a maddening cacophony, filling the air with their calls. It was as though the devil himself was calling to those who would listen, urging them to follow, to rise up, to embrace the darkness that had long been buried beneath the earth. The keeper knew that it was too late to stop what had been set into motion. The prison had broken, and with it, the chains that had bound the devil were no more. The power that had been contained for so long was no longer held by anything. It was free, and the world above would soon know the price of that freedom. The devil's presence had already begun to seep into the earth, its tendrils reaching up from the depths to pull at the hearts of the living. The ancient evil was no longer a distant legend. It was a reality, a force that was slowly consuming everything in its path. The keeper's hand, once steady and resolute, now trembled as he reached out to touch the stone that had always been a part of him. The prison had been his life, his duty, but now, as the devil's power spread, he was no longer sure of what his purpose was. He had been a keeper of secrets, a guardian of what should never be known, but now he was a part of something far darker, something that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of existence. And yet, as the prison trembled and the earth shook, a strange thought lingered in the keeper's mind. Could this awakening, this breaking of the prison, be the beginning of something else? Could it be the beginning of a new world? A world in which the devil was not a prisoner, but a ruler? A world where the shadows were no longer confined to the depths, but walked freely among the living? The thought was fleeting, but it was enough to send a chill through the keeper's being. For the first time in centuries, he doubted his role. For the first time, he questioned the very foundation of the prison he had sworn to protect. Had the devil truly been a force of pure evil? Or had he simply been a prisoner of forces beyond his control, trapped in a prison built to contain not just his body, but the knowledge of what he represented? What if, in freeing the devil, they were also freeing themselves from the bonds that had been placed upon them? The world outside was already beginning to change. The tremors were no longer small, insignificant ripples. They were growing, shaking the earth with a force that could not be ignored. The air was heavy with the scent of something ancient and dark. The earth itself seemed to grow colder as the devil's presence spread, as though the warmth of life itself was being drained away. People across the world began to feel it. The unsettling sense that something was wrong, that the very fabric of reality was shifting. The skies grew darker. The winds carried whispers of forgotten things. Those who had never known fear now found themselves haunted by visions of things that should not be seen. In every corner of the earth, there was a growing sense of dread, as though the very world was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. And yet, in the midst of it all, there were those who sought to embrace the awakening of the devil. The whispers that had been carried on the wind found their way to the ears of those who had long sought power, those who had long felt powerless in a world that had forgotten its true nature. The devil, in his wake, was calling to them, beckoning them to join him, to rise up and take their place at his side. To them, the devil was not a force of destruction, but a liberator, a bringer of a new order. To them, the breaking of the prison was not a catastrophe, but the dawning of a new age. In the heart of the prison, the keeper stood, torn between his duty and the truth that had been revealed to him. The devil had awakened. But what did that mean for the world above? What did it mean for the people who still believed in the stories, in the legends, in the idea of a world untouched by the evil that had been buried beneath the earth? The keeper, once a man of certainty, now found himself questioning everything. The devil was no longer a figure to be feared, but a force that could not be ignored. And the keeper, bound to the prison, was now bound to the devil's power. The world above was changing, and the keeper could feel it. He could feel the shift in the very fabric of reality, the break in the veil that had once kept the world safe. The devil's power was growing, and with it came the knowledge of the truth that had been hidden for so long. The prison had failed, and with it, the chains that had held the devil were gone. The awakening was not just the return of the devil. It was the return of the world's darkest fears, its deepest shadows. The devil's awakening had begun, and there was no turning back. The world above would soon know what it had forgotten, what it had sealed away in the depths. The devil was free, and with him, the shadows that had long been locked away. The keeper, bound to the prison, felt the weight of the change, and as the prison crumbled beneath his feet, he knew that the world was about to fall into darkness once again. The devil had awoken, and with him, a new age had begun. The question was not whether the devil could be stopped, but whether the world could survive his return. The keeper's heart, once filled with duty, now beat with uncertainty. The world above would never be the same. The earth had broken. The prison beneath it, once a place of ancient containment, had shattered. And with it, the chains that had bound the devil were undone. The world, unaware of the monumental shift beneath their feet, was beginning to feel the subtle reverberations of the darkness that had risen. It was not an immediate destruction, nor a sudden outburst, but something more insidious. An erosion of everything humanity had known. A slow, creeping unraveling of the world's very fabric. The gates of hell had opened, not with a blinding flash, but with a whisper that would soon become a roar. The keeper, no longer a solitary wraith in the heart of the prison, now felt himself drawn into the tide of destruction that was sweeping the earth. The devil had awoken. The shadows that had once been locked away were no longer mere figures in the dark. They were real, tangible, powerful, and the knowledge that had been buried beneath the earth had begun to seep into the minds of the living. The veil between worlds had torn, and the echo of the devil's power reached the minds of those susceptible, those who had longed for something beyond their mundane existence, something dark and potent. The whispers had begun to spread, and those who had once ignored the stories now found themselves entranced by them. The prison had been a place of containment for eons, its stone walls and ancient wards built to hold a power far greater than the mortal mind could fathom. But no wall, no magic, no spell could hold forever. Time, that eternal river, had worn away the locks, weakened the seals, and now the devil was free. A being of unimaginable power, a force that had once been a legend and was now a terrifying reality. As the keeper stood, his form flickering between the prison's crumbling walls and the world above, he could feel the devil's power spreading. It was not just a physical force, it was a psychic invasion, a subtle shift in the collective consciousness. People, ordinary people, were beginning to feel it. There was a coldness in the air, an unease that settled in the corners of their minds. The whispering shadows, the forgotten truths, had begun to seep into their dreams, their thoughts, their desires. They could not escape it. In the cities, the streets grew quieter as an unnatural chill descended. The sound of bells ringing in the distance seemed to grow fainter, as though they were being muffled by the weight of the darkness. The stars in the night sky, once a comforting presence, now seemed distant, almost unreachable. And in the hearts of the people, something shifted. It was not a sudden change, but an inexorable one. Their fears began to take root, their doubts blossoming into strange thoughts, strange desires, strange dreams. The devil had awakened, and with him, a new age was dawning. One of terror, of shadows, and of forgotten knowledge. The keeper, bound to the prison, could feel the shift as well. He had always known that the prison's power was not just physical, not just the containment of a body, but the containment of knowledge. Knowledge that could unravel the mind, knowledge that could turn the very foundations of reality into dust. He had been a keeper of secrets, but now those secrets were spilling out, pouring into the world above, and there was no force powerful enough to stop it. The prison was no more, and the world was beginning to crack under the weight of what had been contained within. In the deepest corners of the earth, in the remnants of the shattered prison, the devil stirred. His form was not like anything the human mind could comprehend, not something that could be easily visualized or understood. He was an essence, a force that existed beyond time and space, beyond the limitations of the physical realm. He was darkness itself, the embodiment of the primal forces that had shaped the world. And now, as the prison collapsed, his essence began to stretch, to reach, to claim what was his. The keeper, still bound to the prison, felt his connection to the devil grow stronger. The very air around him vibrated with the pulse of the devil's power, and the whispers in his mind grew louder. The truth that had been sealed away for so long, the truth of the devil's origin, of his role in the creation of the world, of his purpose, was being revealed. And with it came the understanding that the devil was not just a prisoner, not just an evil force that had been locked away. He was a part of the world's fabric, a necessary force that had been hidden, forgotten, suppressed. The breaking of the prison was not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of the world's descent back into chaos. The keeper's role had always been clear: to guard, to protect, to contain. But now, as the devil's power reached out into the world, the keeper found himself questioning everything. Had the prison truly been necessary? Had the devil truly been evil? Or had he simply been a part of the world's natural order, one that had been suppressed for too long? The keeper had spent centuries binding the devil, keeping him locked away. But now, as the world above began to crumble, he wondered if his role had ever truly been to protect the world, or to prevent it from facing its true nature. The devil had awakened, and with his return came the collapse of the old world. The prison had been a place of control, a place where knowledge was hidden, where the world's darkest secrets were kept in check. But now that the secrets were spilling into the world, now that the devil was no longer chained, the old world could not withstand the force of revelation. The lies, the illusions, the boundaries between light and dark were all beginning to dissolve. The shadows that had once been contained now danced freely in the streets, their forms shifting, their whispers growing louder. People began to see things that weren't there, hear voices in the wind, feel the pull of something ancient, something terrifying. The veil between the physical world and the infernal had torn, and now the two realms bled into one another. Those who had been drawn to the prison, those who had sought the devil's power, now found themselves in positions of unimaginable influence. The whispers had called to them, and they had answered, stepping into the shadows with eyes wide open. They embraced the darkness, seeing it not as a force of evil, but as a source of power, of freedom. And as the world above began to fall apart, they rose to take control, to claim their place at the devil's side. But not everyone had been seduced by the devil's awakening. Some, still unaware of the true extent of the changes taking place, felt a growing unease. They could sense the shift in the air, the subtle erosion of the world they knew. The knowledge that had been hidden for so long, the truth that had been sealed away, was now bleeding into their minds. And as the devil's power spread, so too did the growing realization that the world was no longer what it had once been. The earth continued to shake as the world above and below collided. The devil, once a legend, was now an undeniable reality. And with him came the breaking of the world, the beginning of a new age, an age where darkness reigned, where knowledge was no longer hidden, and where the ancient forces that had shaped the world for so long would once again rule. The prison had fallen, and with it, the old order had crumbled. There was no going back. As the keeper, bound to the prison, stood on the precipice of this new world, he realized that the devil had not just awakened. He had brought about the world's end and its rebirth. The question that remained was not whether the world could survive the devil's return, but whether humanity could endure the truth. The devil had awoken, and with him, the breaking of the world had begun. The darkness was here, and there was no place left to hide.